Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something pretty wild. We are going to reverse engineer the absolute mind-blowing longevity of the ancient Egyptian empire. We're going to figure out exactly how they ruled the global economy for a genuinely staggering chunk of civilized history, and they did it without a single modern financial tool. Think about this for just a second. The fall of ancient Egypt actually happened closer in time to the construction of the Burj Khalifa than it did to the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. They were the wealthiest, most productive nation on Earth, and today we are breaking down their 3,000-year economic masterclass.
Look at this timeline, because we really need to wrap our heads around the massive 3,000-year scale we're talking about here. The pyramids were built roughly 500 years after the nation first came together. Then, Cleopatra, the very last pharaoh of Egypt, died about 2.5 millennia later. To put that completely mind-bending timeline into perspective, Cleopatra actually lived closer in time to the 1969 moon landing than she did to the construction of the Great Pyramid, which is a monument she literally would have walked past on a regular basis.
So it naturally makes you wonder, right? How on earth did a civilization functioning with absolutely no banks, no stock markets, no targeted inflation, no income tax, and no concept of GDP manage to outlast every single empire that came after it combined? Exploring this is just an incredible opportunity to look at an economy in its purest form, totally stripped of all that complex noise we see in our modern financial sector.
Well, it all comes down to this. To survive, the Egyptians had to solve the absolute foundation of economics, what we call the central economic problem. And honestly, this is a problem that destroys modern empires even today. Simply put, there is only so much stuff in the world, but human desires, they are literally endless. A person with a good home and good food is eventually going to want a better home and better food. To succeed, the Egyptians had to figure out how to allocate limited resources to a population that had effectively unlimited demands.
And their solution to this was honestly brilliant. They didn't just pick pure capitalism or pure communism. Instead, they went with this really robust hybrid. They used a centrally planned command economy for all the big picture, societal survival stuff. But they mixed it with a surprising amount of personal liberty and free market choice for everyday life. So you had this strict hierarchy with absolute power at the very top with the pharaoh, but everyday workers had remarkable freedom down at the bottom.
Now, you might be wondering how they actually pulled this off on the ground. Because they were a farming society, agriculture was everything. And these massive state-owned farms were administered by enormous temples lining the Nile. Those temples functioned as the ultimate umbrella organization. Just imagine a single building serving as the Vatican, your local city hall, the IRS, and the central bank all rolled into one. All the food was farmed for and then delivered right to these temples.
So, once all that food hit the temple, it was handed back out to the people as fair, standardized wages. For a standard farm laborer, 200 kilograms was their monthly wage, paid entirely in grain. Now, depending on a worker's experience or how good the harvest was, that number could go up or down. But this baseline wage elevated their standard of living so far beyond the neighboring tribes who were just struggling to scrape by on subsistence farming.
But here is where it gets crazy. They didn't just bake bread with this grain. It actually became the world's first decentralized currency. They used a fixed price list to buy and sell everyday goods, making grain the standard measure of wealth. We literally have surviving records showing a cow selling for X amount of grain, or a linen shirt going for Y amount. They were empowering regular citizens to make their own microeconomic choices.
Obviously, paying for things with literal food wasn't exactly perfect. It has some very distinct physical drawbacks, right? It rots, it's super heavy, and dragging massive bags of wheat across town to buy a cow is bulky and attracts rats. But despite all that, it gave the working class the freedom to choose which of their needs were fulfilled and what they could go without. It essentially laid down the foundation for early free market trade, solving that central economic problem from the bottom up.
And that freedom totally bled into their legal rights too. This part blows my mind. Despite living under a literal god king, a lowly peasant could take a grand vizier to the equivalent of court if they were wronged and actually demand compensation. A grand vizier was the second most powerful person in the entire country. That's basically like you or me successfully suing a sitting US senator today and actually winning. Now, none of this intricate system works unless you have a massive surplus of wealth. And geographically, Egypt was basically playing life on easy mode. Unlike hostile climates where humans had to grind all day every day just to stave off starvation, the Nile River gave Egypt this incredible 3-season calendar. The flooding season was actually a huge win. It dumped rich, mineral-laden soil all across the plains, making farming insanely efficient and freeing up a massive chunk of the population's time.
So think about it. What does a government do with a massive population of idle farmers while their fields are completely underwater? Enter the corvée system. This was the ultimate team-building exercise. While the fields were flooded, able-bodied farmers were conscripted to work on massive construction projects. Instead of the state demanding a cut of your paycheck like modern taxes, the state taxed your time. And once those floodwaters retreated, you were totally free to go back to your normal life. And I want to clear something up right now, because there's this huge myth out there perpetuated by everyone from the ancient Greeks to early archaeologists. The pyramids were not the product of brutal slave labor. Was dragging multi-ton stones in the hot sun fun? Probably not. But this time tax was actually a massive vocational training program. Working on these monumental projects gave peasants highly advanced skills in surveying, tool usage, and masonry that they could then take back home to vastly improve their own villages.
But here's why the corvée system was a stroke of absolute economic genius. It forced the whole society to sidestep this massive trap known as the tragedy of the commons. Simply put, nobody wants to foot the bill to build a public road out of their own pocket if they can just wait for their neighbor to do it and then use it for free. The Egyptians totally recognized this flaw in human nature thousands of years ago. Because the people were compelled to put in this work during the flood season, they ended up building incredibly utilitarian infrastructure. We all focus on the big vanity projects like the pyramids, but this labor force primarily built robust road networks, vital irrigation canals, and state granaries that hugely improved the quality of life for everyone. These are things that private, individual enterprise simply wouldn't have funded organically.
Okay, but let's be real, no system is invincible. And using grain as money had one fatal macroeconomic flaw. The entire money supply was tied directly to unpredictable weather. A good flood meant full granaries and a happy population, but a bad flood? That meant instant crop failure, extreme inflation, hoarding, and catastrophic civil unrest that could literally topple a dynasty overnight. They desperately needed a shock absorber. Which brings us to what I think is their absolute greatest invention. Those state granaries, they quietly became the world's very first piece of macroeconomic infrastructure. In good years, the state locked away the surplus grain. In bad years, they released it to stabilize prices and prevent mass famine. They were expanding and contracting the money supply based on the current economic weather, acting exactly like a modern central bank, smoothing out a boom and bust business cycle.
So, without a single economics textbook or formal training, ancient Egyptian farmers accidentally invented and perfected countercyclical fiscal policy. And they pulled this off a staggering 4,000 years before modern economists like John Maynard Keynes were even a glimmer in history's eye. They just intuitively realized they had to step in and save the market from its own wild volatility. This strategy was so impactful it actually survived in our cultural myths. Take the biblical parable of Joseph interpreting the Pharaoh's dream. You know, the famous 7 fat cows followed by 7 thin cows. It's not just some mystical story. When you strip away the religious framing, it's literally just a straightforward historical account of an Egyptian finance minister implementing a strategic grain reserve to save the nation from a highly predictable economic crash.
So, sure, ancient Egypt didn't have a stock exchange or derivatives markets, but the lessons here are so unbelievably relevant for us today. Why? Because technology changes, right? But fundamental human nature, it literally never changes. People will always want more. They will absolutely free ride if you let them. They'll naturally trade when they are empowered to do so, and they will build absolute wonders when a society aligns their energy.
The Egyptians managed to find this incredible balance between centrally planned public infrastructure and personal free market liberty, and they built a system durable enough to survive for 3 millennia. Which leaves us with a fascinating and honestly maybe a little uncomfortable question to ponder. As we struggle with these endless debt cycles and modern economic crises today, have we just completely overcomplicated the simple math of a functioning civilization? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you on the next one.